20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
All right. This is Aaron Rice, and we are live, folks. We are live. Today is Monday, January 11th, and we are live on Facebook, live on LinkedIn, live on Twitter, and live on YouTube. And I want to welcome you to our weekly show we call Race in Real Estate, a tough but necessary conversation. All right. And you can find all of our past shows at raceinrealestate.com. I want to welcome you. Super excited about tonight's show. Super excited about all of our shows, but tonight's show, I'm really super excited about. This is our 12th episode. And those of you that know me know that I can be fairly persistent. And I got introduced to the guest for tonight's show probably about 12, 14 weeks ago. Hadn't heard of him before, got a chance to read his book, got a chance to check out all his YouTube videos. And it is Mr. Shawn Rochester. He is the author of The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. And so I'm super excited to have him as our special guest. I'm going to go ahead and bring him into the conversation, and we're going to get the ball rolling. Whoop, wrong camera. Okay, let's go ahead and bring him in. There we go. We'll get rid of this camera. There we go. I think we got everything squared away now. Let's get you on the right side. Okay. So, Mr. Rochester, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on the platform. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm excited.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well. Thank you so much for agreeing to take my call, to take the invitation for tonight's show. We're super excited to have you. We're broadcasting here from downtown Baltimore, and I believe you're in the Connecticut area. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about the book that you wrote called The Black Tax.
Yeah. So my name is Shawn Rochester. Trying to make a long story short, so I'm an author of a book called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. And in that book, I look at the financial cost of discrimination against Black people in this country. Normally, when people are looking at discrimination, they tend to focus on the injustice or the immorality associated with it. I really wanted to look at the financial cost. And more precisely, what does data and research from the finance institutions in a country say that cost is, right? And it's a powerful book. It's been resonating, around the country and around the world, particularly in the times that we're in. And in addition to that, I also, I'm a former corporate development, executive. I've done transactions all over the world. I'm an investor, cash flow management, expert, and a huge advocate for advancing, Black enterprise, Black communities.
Okay, excellent. So tell me, what were you expecting from tonight's call conversation? Kind of what's the ideal outcome for you?
I think it's just to engage in a really robust conversation about the financial impact of what these discriminatory practices, lead to that have on Black families and the Black community in particular. Mm-hmm. And we can look at past, we can look at the present, we can look at the aggregate, portion of it. What we have is conversations that lack data, they lack context, right? They tend to be more focused on the qualitative aspects of discussions and what people feel and what they believe, as opposed to what is. And that generally leads to people coming to conclusions where they are finding fault with, Black people as individuals, with the group, and they're completely ignoring the impact of the environment in which these people, right, and our group is dealing with. And environment is the vast determinant of outcomes versus the individual. Mm-hmm. So to advance that conversation, for people to know about the Black Tax and about this PhD economic framework that I'm talking about, we can discuss that later. And for that to be propagated, right? I think it do a lot to change the circumstances
Mm-hmm.
under which we're all operating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say is most inspiring about the research that you've done about the story of Black life in America?
Yeah, it's the what's powerful about it is when you look at things over time, longitudinally,
Mm-hmm.
and when you look at them in terms of the cumulative effect, not a point in time where some kind of discriminatory practice happened,
Mm-hmm.
it really helps to fill in the blanks of how did we get here and what is here,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how is it that after 400 years, Black people only own 2% of U.S. wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that because of our ineptitude, or is that because of something else?
Mm-hmm.
And that journey takes people through a paradigm shift, and that's the first step that's necessary in the process. We all
Mm-hmm.
want people to take a different set of actions, but new actions has to follow new thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first we got to shift the paradigm, and we do that through information that's really laid out in a powerful cumulative way. It's based on data. It helps it build in this mosaic, right? And then that can lead to empathy and understanding, and we just start thinking about how we play a role in the transformation that's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So are you brought in by a lot of corporate entities when it comes to diversity, inclusion, equity? Do you talk on these types of topics, and kind of what's that reception been like?
Yeah, it's been extraordinarily powerful. Whether it's just a lay person on the street, or it's a CEO or CXO or a diplomat or whatever, the result is typically always the same,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's extremely powerful and folks didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
They have belief systems and ideas about what they believe occurred in the past and who's at fault for what, but they really had no idea of the fullness of it, the scale, the scope, right? The continuity associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fortunate. I've spoken at places like the United Nations. I've spoken at Google. People can see that talk. Online. I've spoken at Amazon and Viacom and Microsoft and a bunch of different places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Merck and UPS and
Mm-hmm.
lots of terrific places.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's the reception has been overwhelmingly positive, because I'm speaking in the language of business. I'm not
Right.
talking emotion. I'm not telling you what my opinion is on the matter. I mean, we could always discuss that separately. There's a big difference between what we think,
Mm-hmm.
what we believe, and what is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about what is,
Mm-hmm.
not what our intentions are.
Right, right. So we were fortunate enough last week to have the owners of Harriet Tubman Tours. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, were born and enslaved here in Maryland. I guess the two of the most famous slaves here in Maryland, or nationwide, and so we got a chance to talk to them, and we just. Sometimes on our conversations we talk about what's happening with appraisals and different topics with current times, and then we had the fortunate luxury of being able to talk to Alex Green last week about just what it was like living in the early 1800s and being Harriet Tubman. And so I think a lot in your book you start off talking about starting from slavery. I know you start from before that, but starting from slavery and kind of what that meant of just not even being able to own your own body, let alone being able to build wealth and the wealth that was wasted just trying to buy your family's freedom and buy your own freedom. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. So in the second part of the book, I do a look back, right, which is from the time of slavery up until the present. And the idea is, let's look at these discriminatory practices, but from the perspective of what was the economic cost of it, right? And what is research saying that cost is? Because we can get into a conversation about whether or not you think slavery was a big deal. And believe it or not, there's many people who don't think slavery was that big of a deal, as absurd as that sounds. But based on the data set that you have, that might feel like a logical conclusion. So we start to talk about, what is the value of labor extracted from millions of people over almost 250-year period? It's a quarter of a millennia, right? And the value of that is massive, right? It's estimated to be, as high as 24 trillion in some cases, and as high as 97 trillion in others. So if you think about even getting a midpoint in there, you're close to $50 trillion. and that number tends to blow people away. But then if you say, okay, let's set that number aside and let's talk about what were the value of the people who were held in bondage in 1860, right? Because they were the most liquid asset in the country. They were worth 50% of the full economic value of the South. Their value is so large that you have to measure it in terms of national wealth or national income, GDP. And from a wealth perspective, it's somewhere between 16 and 20% of national wealth. From a GDP perspective, the estimates of the value of those people was 1 to 2 years of GDP. So when you start thinking about just what the people meant to the country in terms of the value, it becomes extraordinary. Because 1 to 2 years of GDP was 19 trillion pre-COVID. So that's 19 to 38 trillion. You take an average of that, you're at 28.5. If you look at it from a wealth perspective, and at the time that I wrote the book, national wealth was about 85 trillion. 16 to 20% of that was 14 to 17 trillion. It's about 15.5 trillion. That's a separate way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back into the 1930s, Henry Clay is putting a valuation of Black people held in bondage at that time on the floor of the Senate. He's saying it's about $1.2 billion. Slave-related investments generated between 6 and 8% per annum, right? So even if you took a number like 5.5% and you look at that over time, that's over 24 trillion. Even if you go back further and you say, well, who's Henry Clay and all that kind of stuff, we can go back to what Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were saying about the value of people in the 1810s, Black people who were held in bondage. And they say it was roughly about 1 year of GDP. If you put that in equivalent terms, it's about 19 trillion, or the equivalent of selling 1/3 of all public land in the country, right, at that time. The point is the value of these people is extraordinary. It's massive. It's hard to comprehend, right? So the idea that these things weren't a big deal is absurd. Just look at the numbers. Forget about what you feel about it, right? It would show up in evaluation if it wasn't a big deal. And it turns out that it's massive and hard to comprehend.
And so who's the audience for what you've written? I want to call it a story, but I mean, I don't know if calling it a story is the right context, but who's the audience that there's all this research went into address?
The audience is everyone, right? You have to have the public, the electorate, informed about what this meant, because they have an opinion on the state of affairs of Black people and what resources should be given or denied to Black people, and who's at fault for the situation. And generally, people think it's the fault of Black people, actions or inaction, or ideas that are flawed and all this kind of stuff. But you really have to understand the history behind it so that you can be informed when you make these decisions. And then it's also particularly important to people who create policy, and for people who allocate resources, and for people who execute policy. So that's why I talk to everybody, right? From the layperson to the CXO to the diplomat. This is really important for anybody who interfaces with our community, particularly from an economic perspective, and for us, right? Like we feel the burden of it, right? And we bear the cost of it, but many folks don't have the detail on the history. Like how did we get here? How is this even possible? You know what I mean? And how do you articulate what you know and feel and believe in a powerful way? This allows you to do it. You know what I mean? It's laid out in the book. Anybody anywhere can elegantly articulate this to whomever, right? The formula's there.
And you use a lot of different resources from a lot of different universities and institutions. It's not, like you said before, it's not just, your data that you're, although you've accumulated a lot over the years. Can you talk about some of the studies that have been done by some other institutions and some of the other resources that you use to gather the information for the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's a who's who of institutions, right? So it's, there's research there from, of course, Harvard and Yale and Chicago and Michigan and, just a ton of schools and really first-rate institutions across the country. And you want to look at, the discriminatory effects in markets that are really critical to wealth accumulation, right? We want to get a sense of what are the levels of anti-Black bias, right, that exist currently, and are those levels conscious? People know what they're doing. To what extent is it unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do they even come up with measurements for things that are unconscious? So there's just a plethora of first-rate institutions that have done a phenomenal amount of work.
Mm-hmm.
And like in the first part of the book, in the dedication, like the dedication I make is to the researchers, right? That really toil in the night to find this information to help lead us all, right, out of ignorance. And they don't do it. They don't get fame, and they don't really get significant rewards. So I just wanted to uplift them because their work is powerful and enlightening.
Sure. So you spoke, I believe, a couple of months ago, maybe November, December, at NARAB at their annual convention, their virtual convention. NARAB is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is the African American version of the National Association of Realtors.
Hmm.
That started in the 40s because we, as real estate practitioners, were not allowed into the national organization. So
Hmm.
I unfortunately missed that conversation, but it was good to. So I know there's sections in your book about housing and finance and credit and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you covered and what angle you were speaking from at that conference?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, real estate is critical, right? Let's just kind of underscore that.
Mm-hmm.
On average, I think it's 64% of the average portfolio of the average Black family is in their real estate holdings, right? The greatest wealth builder that's really kind of existed in the history of the world has been the appreciation of real estate in the United States, of which Black people were prevented
Mm-hmm.
from being able to participate. And we're not talking about people who just wanted to participate. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have the credit. It was independent of your ability to participate, right? So that's a really critical thing. And one of the things that I talked about a lot was the history of it, and then in terms of solutions, the PhD economic framework, right, which stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs,
Mm-hmm.
create and expand business, and provide capital in the Black community. And a powerful way to do that is when we engage in real estate transactions, to the extent possible, let's ensure that we include high quality Black professionals,
Right.
right? And that is, I think it's terrific. We see these stories of really successful people who are like, hey, I just bought a $10 million home. And God bless them. And that's wonderful. And I love it and continue to prosper. But you just
Mm-hmm.
pay $600,000 in realtor fees
Mm-hmm.
to the brothers just to get paid in that transaction. I mean, these are phenomenal jobs, right? That enrich families that are never going to be, offshored or exported someplace else, right? I think back in 2016, if I remember the numbers correctly, like 177,000 homes were kind of purchased and refinanced and stuff like that amongst Black people.
Mm.
Like if we had used Black realtors, there would have to be another 14,000 Black realtors employed, working all day, every day, just to process those things.
Right.
That's 14,000 families and churches and nonprofits and school board. You know what I mean? That ripples through the community. We're talking about billions of dollars in fees,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, of course, there's an ecosystem because, to complement the realtors, we also have the insurance brokers, right? Because we have to insure these homes, right? And are we doing business with our professionals that are in this space? And then do we think about the ecosystem of the general contractors?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're gonna use a Black realtor to find our home, right? And then we're gonna use a broker to insure it, right, for the future. We're
Right.
gonna use a contractor to help turn that house into a home,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we want to tweak it a little bit, fix some things and whatnot. There's just a mind-bogglingly powerful ecosystem of professionals, right, with our communities that are really starved for opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about PhD is there is what can we do as individuals and as households, and then there's what can the ecosystem do, corporations and governments and institutions. But as individuals, we get to choose where we spend our money.
Right.
Somebody gets to tell us what to do and how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and given that on average, we're only spending about 2% of our collective spend on Black enterprise, we got to do a better job, a massively better job. And just let's just start with the things that make sense, that within reach, which is if you're so blessed to be in a position to be able to, acquire a home, make sure to the extent possible that you do business with a real estate professional who's Black. That's going to transform that individual and their family and their community. It's super critical. And that's just not something, certainly we have to do it as Black people, but anybody can do that.
Sure.
Right? The solution is economic, right? The solution is through jobs, business, and capital, right? Doing more business with Black enterprise and Black professional is super critical.
Yeah, I've often heard that the average real estate transaction outside of real estate practitioner professional fees generates about $53,000 per property, just in spread out throughout the community for insurance and contractors and just everybody, Home Depot or Lowe's or what have you. When people are making improvements to their home or what have you. So furniture stores, it just generates kind of like you said, that ripple effect. So why do you think, or what have you found in your studies, both from a implicit, explicit type scenario, why aren't more people supporting both within the community and allies of the community? How come more people aren't supporting Black realtors, contractors, insurance providers, mortgage lenders?
I mean, that's a combination of things. You're really getting at the heart of why I wrote the book, right? Like, I wanted to provide the strongest possible case for commercializing Black enterprise across the board for us and for others, right? To do it. Why is that? Because we're not doing it. Because despite all the talk, we're spending 2% of our resources on our own enterprises. That's the fact. Those are the numbers, despite the rhetoric. And part of the challenge is kind of multifold. One, there are high levels of anti-Black bias outside of the Black community that are imposed upon the Black community. I talk about that in the book. But that bias exists within our community. We have anti-Black bias, right? Like that has been internalized. So there's questions of quality, and there's questions of, a bunch of different things, right? When it comes to doing business with kind of like Black enterprise or Black professionals. So, lawyers feel it, accountants feel it, doctors feel it, all kinds of different practitioners, right? The whole white ice is colder type thing. You also have the issue, the socialization and the constant messaging that is showing you, the success in other areas that are not dominated by Black people. So over time, you internalize those kinds of things, right? So what we don't see is the difference in resource allocations. What we see is the outcome. Right? And we associate that with the individual. So what I wanted to do was to show people, listen, if we are approaching doing business with Black enterprise as a cost or a charity, right? The cost is, I'll take the L and do this. Like, that's not the approach you should be taking. Or the charity is like, hey, I'm going to help you out. Well, this is a commercial transaction, right? This isn't a charitable kind of engagement. But if we're going to treat it as a cost, let me just show people what the cost actually is for the way things are right now. And they're exorbitant. And then that shifts people's thinking. They say, well, what can I do to be able to affect change? And then one of the things that you can do is actually commercializing Black enterprise. Because a lot of folks aren't thinking about it. It's not necessarily nefarious, right? When they close their eyes and they think of an attorney, it's a white male, 6'2" with some gray hair, you know what I mean? And wash, rinse, repeat, right? So that's who they're going after. And they're not, that may be an unconscious type of thing. So the idea is to get people thinking about, how do I engage more? And then know that leads to these really powerful economic, stimulative, impacts. And then people start to get intentional and they get, creative. And they start thinking about, how do I execute this? And what are the systems that need to be put in place to be able to do it really in a more frictionless way, right? There's a lot of friction to doing it, right now. So, as we kind of talked about earlier, my view is always, we all want a different set of actions to come out of these conversations, and different new actions has to follow new thinking. Right. So the book is designed to paradigm shift, get people to see things differently. Right. And now they're motivated and inspired, right, to take a different set of actions.
So I want to shout out a couple of people. Big shouts out to Colleen Rippey chiming in. She's definitely saying powerful conversation. Shawn's a smart dude. Adding the book to my list. And Iona, same thing. If we don't know and understand our history, we're destined to repeat it. Important conversation. Thank you. And so definitely people are trying to chime in. If you have some questions, definitely chime into the comment section. Want to make sure that they get answered live and in real time. But talk to me a little bit about, I guess, like when you were doing your study and thinking about writing the book, why did you decide to go down the path that you decided to go down? Because it's a very kind of unique study. I mean, I haven't heard of something in the context that you're writing it and the path that you're writing it. Like what makes this story so different in the way that you decided to attack it?
Yeah.
And then also the second part of the question is, talk to me about some use cases and just some cases where you've seen people kind of embrace what you're saying and then put it into action as well.
Sure. So the first thing is, I approached this knowing that I'm not the first person to have this conversation. We've been talking about this for 153 years, right? But yet we're at 2%.
Right.
So my view was, how could I approach this differently, right? And that became, my thinking, right, around the whole thing. So it was just like, okay, let's look at what is the cost. Like let's forget about the idea of the injustice. Not forget about it, but I'm not going to focus on it. Other people focus on it.
Right.
Let's just kind of stick to the economics. Because we can agree to disagree on qualitative things. It is very difficult to do that on quantitative things, right? The numbers are the numbers. You can go through it, you can look at the analysis, you can look at the statistical data analysis and the sets and all that, and come to your opinion, but you don't get to reject that. I'm not telling you what my feelings were. So it was approaching it from a quantitative perspective. What I kept seeing was people keep approaching things from a civil and social perspective. And what they don't understand is that first, second, third, fourth, and fifth is economics. Civil and the social are derivatives of that, right? What you're seeing is what happens to people who don't have capital, right? What you're seeing is what happens when people have a massive gap in jobs. What you're seeing is what's happening when you don't have a significant business infrastructure. Right. And what you're seeing is when, you don't have capital affordability. So I wanted to just look at it from that perspective. And no one else was doing that. Right. And I wanted to look at it cumulatively and also where are we right now and make the ties and the connection. It was really a process of building a mosaic. Right. A mosaic is like a picture that's made of all of these small pieces that are put together that you see this amazing image at the end. So the data is in 200, 300, 400 different places. But when you start to put it together to tell the story that's longitudinal and cumulative, it's more powerful. And it's also very difficult because the story, the information is horrible, right? And you're exposed to a lot of it. Right. So that aspect is a very, very difficult thing. Normally when people kind of read through the stuff, the book is deceptively small. Right. People write these kind of really big, thick books on things. I'm not talking about anything I can't tie to numbers and studies. Right. So I'm very efficient. Right. With the words and pretty net when it comes to the writing anyway. It's the type of thing where you do have to take a deep breath. Like the history of what has transpired here is horrific, right? When it comes to Black people. And I just wanted to look at that from an economic perspective. And I think we've been socialized to think about things from a civil and social, right? And those are derivatives of economic problems. For example, racism is a justification of the maldistribution of economic resources. It's the economics that's first. Racism is a justification of that. People got to sleep at night. So now I got to come up with theories as to why you shouldn't have that land and why you should be subjugated to this horrible state and the creator of the universe said that this is what it should be, and all this kind of pseudo nonsense, right? That was taught for many, many years. It's a justification of an economic motivation, right? So first, second, third, fourth, and fifth is all economics. And I want to look at it from that perspective, right? And people haven't. And to me, it just makes sense, right? I think part of it is I have a curiosity of why things are the way they are. I think part of it is, I got an engineering background, although I think there's a ton of engineers out there, but it's super clear to me. So I just kind of followed that path and laid it out in that way. And I've been expecting people to do it forever, but I keep looking around and it's still talking about the same stuff. There's no economics, right? It's just like we gotta stop with that.
If not you, then who, right? So talk to me about, you talked about some kind of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that you've spoken at and done keynotes before. Talk about some changes that you're starting to see out there in the corporate workplace, because the book was written in 2018. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it was released in 2018.
18.
It was being put together for before that. But what you're starting to see is PhD all over the place, right? You're starting to see companies having conversations about how do I leverage my balance sheet to put capital in institutions that provide liquidity in the Black community, right? So you're starting to see people like, Netflix that are like, we're going to commit X percentage of cash on hand, and we're going to put it in, Black banks and some, credit unions and CDFIs and some other things, right? You have other corporations who are talking about doing that.
JP Morgan Chase, $30 billion.
Yeah, $30 billion associated with that. Bank of America is talking about $1 billion. But one of the things, so people are talking more about this kind of PhD framework or the symbolism associated with it. But what I advocate for is specificity. So, and I'm very clear on that every place I go. Minority, diverse, inclusive does not mean Black.
Right.
We have to be very clear on that. Like I've been on the phone in conversations. There's $100 million being deployed, because of all this kind of stuff, and you're like, well, how does this get to Black people? How does this get to Black enterprise? How does it get to Black business? And what it does is it gets in the direction of minorities, right? They don't actually have specificity of how that gets to Black people, right? And it's very, very problematic because it's emanating from all of this violence, right? Associated with Black depredation, but it's not, flowing to Black people. And it's important that you give people the understanding behind the need for specificity. It's almost like if you say Black, it's offensive to people. You've gone beyond the pale, right? Whoa, you took this into a whole nother level. Whoa, right? So now people have been socialized to find other words that are acceptable. So of color, Black and brown, diverse, equity, low income. And I'm like, yeah, I get all that. But unless you're specific, you're going to have very dilutive impacts. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Let's say in your supply chain, which is super critical, and you want to do more business with female businesses, right? I think, or women-owned businesses. I think that's fantastic. Love it. Double, triple, quadruple down on it. If you look at the data and you say, well, how much revenue is coming from female businesses that have employees? Those are the larger ones, right? Black businesses. Women-owned businesses that have employees. It's about 1.2 trillion. If you say, okay, how much of that is coming from Black women business owners? It's less than 2%. So while you can have a massive impact on women-owned businesses, you have almost no impact on Black women-owned businesses. You got to be specific. So it's not until the $99 that a sister sees any economic benefit from that. So you can't have these massively generalized targets, right, for specific problems. If you say the same thing about let's do more business with our Latino brothers and sisters, and I'm like, that's wonderful. I love it. Double, triple, quadruple down on it. But if you ask the same question, how much business are their employees driving? Are there businesses who have employees driving? About 380 billion, which is great. If you say, well, how much of that is coming from Black people within that group? It's less than 2%. So you see the same dynamic, right? You chose this kind of group. It's not getting to Black people. If you say, let's do the same thing with our Asian brothers and sisters, I think it's great. Double, triple, quadruple down on it. They're driving about 628 billion for their businesses that have employees. No Black people in there by definition. Mm-hmm. If you look at Black businesses that have employees, they're doing about $100 billion, about 1 million people employed. But if I add up that whole group, that would be diverse. Only 4% of that. Only 4% of that diverse group is Black. So you could put all of that money in there. For every $4, for every dollar, 4 cents is going to Black enterprise. You're going to have to be specific. You're well intentioned, you're well meaning, right? But the mechanism's all wrong, mm-hmm. right? And in no way, place in life and problem solving do you do that. You never solve specific problems with general solutions. You tailor it, mm-hmm. right? That's why I advocate for specificity. I think it's great if you're going to put $1 billion out for minorities, but that could have no impact or marginal impact on Black enterprise, right? So we need specificity, right? So, and that's something that people need to know and understand. And I just stick with the data, mm-hmm. right? I know you mean well. I'm not talking about that, right? I'm talking about what's the outcome? What are the numbers saying? Because that's impacting families, right? That's impacting generational wealth or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. And we need to have policymakers and leaders fully understanding that. You choose, you can say, I don't care. That's okay. But you can't be like, I didn't know. I want to make sure that you're informed because I know people are trying to do the right thing.
Right. So you talked about a lot of the data, being kind of readily available, but, talk about some of the challenges that you ran up against along the way of writing this book. Just maybe personal challenges or just access to information challenges. What were some of the obstacles that were in your way when crafting the story?
It was more, it's difficult information to be exposed to constantly. It's not great to be exposed to that much information. I have far more information than I actually put in the book, mm-hmm. right? And I continually collect it. Mm-hmm. So you can have the impact of being associated with so many negative things, and you're constantly learning how bad things were, mm-hmm. right? So that can be challenging. You definitely need an outlet. You need somebody to be able to talk to and kind of share thoughts and ideas and not kind of bottle all that stuff up. Mm-hmm. The other piece was, I was doing it myself. I was aggregating it, right? Like, I created a publishing company. I had to figure out how to write a book. I had to figure out how to publish a book. I had to figure out how to put a book together. I had to figure out how to do all of that stuff and then apply my own economic framework to it, which is, to make sure I have high quality, editors and proofreaders and, book designers and cover designers and a website and everything, right? So can I, utilize high quality Black talent as I am producing this? Mm-hmm. So I literally use my own economic framework to do it. That's non-trivial because when you start asking the question, where are these people, right? And how do you get to them? That takes extra work. That takes extra time, right? But if I'm going to deploy capital, then I'm going to do my level best to deploy it and make sure that it impacts us. Right. So it's a combination of the work, the research, putting it all together. It's like you figure it all out. I have to study the space and know it. I have full creative control. I own everything, right, associated with what I do. I don't need anybody's permission mm-hmm. on, what I write about or speak about or any of that kind of stuff, which is liberating mm-hmm. because very often people don't know enough to be able to weigh in on it, mm-hmm. right, particularly mm-hmm. this type of information. So that was non-trivial. That was actually quite difficult, to do all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But entirely worth it. I feel really great about the work. I wanted to make something that was world class. I wanted to involve as much Black talent as possible. I know that's very difficult to do if somebody else owns your work. Mm-hmm. So I just made decisions that allow me to act on principle and not pragmatism.
So then naturally the book is published, it's ready to go, they're flying off the shelves, you're on the New York Times bestseller list, like right out the gate. Everything's roses, right? That's not how it goes?
Nah, that's not how it goes.
How'd it go for you?
I was actually, really, really blessed because I launched the book at Google, corporate headquarters, right? Which was fantastic. Like they have the best people in the world come speak there. They have their own. It's like their version of TED Talks. It's
Mm-hmm.
called the
Mm-hmm.
Talks at Google platform.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I was fortunate to be on that, and for the team of folks at Google that all made that happen. For an amazing brother who kind of spearheaded that, uh, whose name is Shadon Delabo. He's actually, you can see him interviewing me afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a phenomenal first start, right? To be able to lay that information out and have it there. And then, within a few months, I was talking at, like the Executive Leadership Council, and, that I was talking at United Nations. So I
Mm-hmm.
was very fortunate, but my information was unique and powerful,
Right.
and it helped to explain and fill in the gaps for what people felt but had difficulty articulating,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? That really, really resonated with people. So for me, it is always people are motivated and inspired and transformed by it, and then they pretty much short circuit the system and create opportunities for me to have access to platforms that I wouldn't otherwise have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, people don't know who I am. Now, when I show up, that's a whole nother story,
Right.
right?
Right.
But initially, they don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like green eggs and ham, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna like it.
So, so where can people actually purchase the book? We don't necessarily want them to go to Amazon to do it. I would think we want them to go directly to you to purchase it. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah. No, well, it's a combination of the two,
Okay.
right? So, for folks so the book is available on our website, which is www.blacktax. That's with the ed.com, and it's available in a paperback, and it's available in an ebook format, right? For my international readers, it's really critical, for them to have access to, they can get it on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
the Kindle platform, paperback, and ebook is available. For my audiobook lovers, I heard you loud and clear for a really, really long time, and now, all my books are available on Audible as well, right? So you can get the
Awesome.
Black Tax there for my commuters and folks who love audiobooks. I'm a big fan of audiobooks myself. So, however, and then it's also available in various Black bookstores,
Okay.
right, around the country. So we've heard you loud and clear. We've opened up the channels. At one point, people could only get it on our website,
Okay.
right? But of late, like really, really recently, now it's available on Amazon's platforms, as well as on ours.
All right, Colleen. So you know where to get the book. So let me make sure I got the website correct. It's blacktaxed ed at the end.com.
Yep.
Okay.
.com.
Went ahead and put that into the comment feed. So as you look into the future, what are you most excited about?
Wow, that's a great question. That keeps shifting with all the madness that we're dealing with, right? On a fairly constant basis. But what I'm focused on is how do we get people to really understand? The first step is empathy and understanding,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've got to unpack and disarm people on their current and existing belief system, which is based on what they've been told and what they are constantly seeing from media images. They don't really have a good concept of history at all, and very little concept of the present as it pertains to Black people. So it's just helping people to get information, that's on the Black Tax, making sure that they're aware that the way you solve problems is through the PhD economic framework, really for everyone to get that and to see it. I think it's really critical for our political representatives, right, from the very top to at a local level to understand this concept of PhD. We need to deploy it, in our communities. There needs to be specificity,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to be thinking about, how to bring technology into creating the platforms that are necessary to hyper accelerate, all of this,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we're talking about. So, I'm excited about really just deploying this framework and then working on what are the best solutions and pathways within the framework, Because if you're outside of it, it's very easy to get into shiny objects that have no economic impact, whatsoever. So you kind of talked about like what are some of the things that happen, right? And a lot of times it's people like, I never really thought about who I'm doing business with. I never thought about the Black realtor or accountant or wealth manager or the contractor or the auto dealer, all these kinds of things. Like I'm gonna incorporate these folks, right, into how I transact as an individual, as a family. And then you have organizations that say, the people kind of reach out from all over. And they say, we read your book, we saw the talk, and we want to do PhD. We're going to think about who we're doing business, and we're going to try to find out where there's Black businesses in our communities and where we can do the stuff online. And we never thought about doing any business with a Black bank. We didn't even know a Black bank exists, right? If you go back to I have 2 talks that I did at Google. One was in corporate headquarters in California, and the other is in the New York headquarters, right? That one's on my YouTube page. Okay. You go into the Q&A, you can see that people in the audience are asking the question, what are these Black banks? Right. By the way, this is long before it's fashionable to do so, right? And how do we put our money in Black banks? And how do we get Google to put its money in Black banks, right? This is before this age where it's fashionable to think deeply about these things, right? So the impacts are significant. And then there are other things that are happening right now at different organizations that I don't want to talk about just yet.
Sure.
But they're implementing PhD frameworks within their organization, and it's really, really powerful, right? And it's a non-trivial thing to do.
And so for someone that's just joining the conversation, can you break down PhD for those that maybe have missed it? And
so PhD is an economic framework that I lay out, and it stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create and expand business, and provide capital within the Black community. The reason for that is pre-COVID, we're missing about 6 million jobs across the broader Black community. We're missing about 1.4 million businesses with employees. Let me say that again. We're missing about 1.4 million businesses with employees. Right? There's 2.56 million Black businesses. 4% of those have employees. 96% do not have any employees. That 4% generates almost 70% of the revenue, about $100 billion, and it employs over 1 million people. That's only about 110,000 businesses. There should be 1.5 million of those, right? And of course, we're all familiar with the collective wealth gap between our balance sheet, right, and those of our white peers and others, which is well over $10 trillion, right, of impact. And this framework is focused on, at the end of the day, when we deploy our resources, when we come up with policies and programs and plans, they need to have the end result of being stimulative for business development, jobs, right, for job creation, for business development and expansion, and providing capital. So everything needs to go through that framework. Is very, very, very powerful, right? Even something as important and profound and large as reparations has to go through a PhD economic framework, right? Otherwise, it won't be stimulative for job creation in the Black community. What you'll do is you'll have massive stimulation in everybody else's community, right? Because we won't have the business infrastructure to run it through. So that's why that framework is so important. Frameworks are super critical because it helps us all to judge the efficacy and impact of whatever plan or program that we're contemplating, right? So when people who founded, America broke away from Europe and decided to get into this idea of self-governance, they created a framework. That framework is called the Constitution. And then they judge the efficacy and the impact of laws and actions now relative to what that framework says. You have to have a similar framework for economics, right? And PhD is kind of the overall view of that, right? At the end of the day, it depersonalizes things, right? People are wonderful, they're great, they're not impinge upon their character and all that kind of stuff. You're a great mother, husband, brother, whatever. That's great. At the end of the day, did it create jobs? Did it create or expand business? Did it provide capital in ways that are affordable and available in the Black community? Yes or no? And to what extent? Right? If you've done that, that's powerful. We'll talk about how to scale it. If you haven't done it, it's a shiny object, right, with no economic value. And we should eliminate those things and focus on things that actually have those outcomes: jobs, business, and capital.
Right.
PhD.
And we talked a little bit briefly about so what's your opinion about opportunity zones and how that fits into the framework, both in regards to what's actually happening on the street and maybe the intention of it, and do you think the Biden-Harris team may make some changes to make it a little bit more equitable where it's lacking?
Yeah, so opportunity zones, we can do like a really kind of high level kind of discussion on it. It basically it is a framework that was passed as a law, right? That allows for capital to be invested in low income areas. There are thousands of them across the country that the federal government has identified. And if you make investments in these areas, you have to do it through your qualified opportunity zone fund, right? But then you are able to defer or reduce your capital gains tax depending on how long you make the investment. So if you let it ride for 10 years, then you won't pay any capital gains associated with it. If you follow all the rules and regulations associated with it, that's a huge incentive, right, for people who have significant capital gains. And capital gains is you invested in some kind of financial product or business or something like that, and it increased in value. That's called a gain, right? And you put capital in it, so you had a gain on your capital. You had to pay tax on that. If you take that money and you invest it in an opportunity zone and you do it long enough or long enough period of time, then you won't have to pay capital gains tax. On that. That's the idea. So it's to draw billions and billions and billions of dollars of capital to make investments in these kind of low income communities that have been identified all over the country. It's a well-intentioned idea. What you have to do is you have to look at it from a PhD perspective, which PhD says at the end of the day, this should be stimulative for job creation, business development, right? And providing capital in those areas and for those people, right? So what you wind up seeing is that capital is coming into those areas to really do real estate development projects, right? So, but it should be coming in there to do projects that actually create employment, businesses, right? Within there. But the vast majority of it is in real estate development. Now that's okay, but the problem is if you don't apply PhD, you can do $1 billion real estate development within a low income or Black community and nobody in that community benefits.
Right.
Why? Because who are the plumbers and who are the electricians and who's putting up the drywall and where you're getting the steel from and all your supply chain, you're not buying from any businesses in those communities. The labor that you're employing, you're not using the labor from people in those communities. So you're not creating jobs, right? And you're not, creating, business development and expansion, right? Because of that activity. And then all the capital that you're bringing in there, are you putting it in any Black banks or credit unions that might be in that community? Are you putting it in CDFIs, community development, financial, institutions that might be there that provide? The answer is no. That's not part of the intentionality of it. So and when they do build businesses there, what you wind up doing is importing talent from outside of the zone, which is a problem, right? And people will say, well, I don't have the talent in the zone to do it, so I'll just import the talent. Well, I'm like, well, you're not solving the underlying problem.
Right.
And what's missing from an intermediary standpoint is the resources to invest in upskilling the talent, so that you actually have the job creation within there, right? Because the challenge with a lot of solutions for areas of low income is they're Band-Aid type solutions.
Right.
The most important thing you can do for a low income area is to make it not low income, right? Which means you have to upskill the area and then bring in the jobs that now are tailored to those skills, right? Where you upskilled it. So even in those things, PhD has to be a fundamental part of it. And what you find is it's not. Like people say, I want to be helpful, so I want to invest in low income housing. And that's fantastic. And I think it's wonderful because they're trying to bridge this gap, right? Real estate prices are too high. We got to make something that's more affordable. That's terrific. My question is, who's building these houses?
Right.
You got any black businesses, professionals engaged in that? The answer is no. They've not thought about it at all, right? I'm like, are you giving them away for free? I'm facetious now. No, we're going to sell them. Do you have realtors engaged in it who are black? No. Oh, wow. Okay, that's a really good idea. Okay, yeah. Are they going to insure it? They're going to self-insure? No. They're going to have insurance. It's required by the person who's putting up the mortgage. And prudence says you got to have insurance, right?
Right.
Do you have black insurers engaged in that? So there's a multiplier effect that's always missing, right? Because they're approaching us as consumers who just need to be lifted up just a bit to get out of trauma, as opposed to trying to approach it as how do we get a better mix of consumption and production within the community, right? And you get that by having the business infrastructure, and you get that by having the better quality of jobs and a higher paying jobs that go along with better skill sets and more advanced skill sets. So they're well intentioned, but they're approaching it wrong. And that's why this economic framework is so important, because if your outcome isn't stimulative to jobs, business, and capital, you're just going to deploy it in ways and you'll lose a multiplier effect, right? So you got to be specific, it's got to be economic, and it's got to be scalable. Can this thing operate at scale? These problems are huge. Stop with these $1,000 solutions for $1 million problems, and $1 million solution for $1 billion problem, and $1 billion solution for $1 trillion problem. You're off by 3 orders of magnitude. Knock it off. These issues and challenges are massive, right? They have evolved over a 400-year period here, a 575-year period in general, right? The idea that you're going to under-resource these projects makes no sense from a design kind of perspective.
Oh boy. Wow. I knew this was going to be a powerful conversation. I knew it was. And I'm so thankful that you took time away from your family to spend some time with me and my family and my sphere of influence, just kind of spreading the word. How can people get in contact with you if there's a corporation that's interested in having you come speak or do a virtual conversation or just basically engage with you? How do they do that?
Yeah, they can do it, through our website, www.blacktax.com, right? There's inquiries, a form where people can make about, doing talks and consulting at their companies or institutions or governments. We do that. I can be reached on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Trying to do a better job on Twitter. I'm not super amazing guy when it comes to social media, but I'm trying to do a better job. But those are all pathways that people can reach me. Definitely get the book, right, and then propagate the knowledge. Don't be an island of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right? Share it out with people. You don't need to convince everyone, but you do need to convince a critical mass of people. Right. And we could have a massive impact. I think this is all about helping people to 10x the solutions that they're putting in place, and to understand that the pie is bigger when you develop people and you allow them to deploy their skills. Right. We are paying massive, exorbitant costs as a country for the high levels of economic deprivation that has been perpetrated on Black people. The loss is in the trillions of dollars, right? I laid that out in my talks previously. Citigroup did a bunch of work on that they independently came up, with the I think it's 16 trillion over the last 20 years. McKinsey is corroborating the same work. They said if you eliminated the wealth gap, it would increase GDP by $1.5 trillion, right? My calculation says it would be 2 trillion. And I was talking about, previously. So the point of all of that is the pie is bigger. There's more in it for all of us. Even if you didn't care about all the touchy-feely stuff, you just want to make some money. Discrimination is bad for capital. It's bad for business, right? There's no version of it that's a good thing. Discrimination reduces commerce. Commerce reduces trade, right? It makes both sides poorer, right? So there's something in it for all of us. So that's an important message for people to understand. You want to make more money? Do PhD.
Right. PhD. Get the book, folks. get the book, folks. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want people to know as we close out the conversation this evening?
No, I think you did a great job. Check out the book, reach out, about us, doing talks in your corporation or organization, so on and so forth. Check me out on YouTube, on Google. You can get a sense of it. You don't got to take my word for it. And then reach out, and we can make things happen.
Absolutely. And I did put the link in the comment sections as well. So definitely appreciate your time. And I wish you a safe, happy, healthy new year. And keep up the great work, my brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye. All right. So this is Aaron Rice. And I think we might be back next week for another show, but we'll see. And I think we might leave it here. I think we might just leave the conversation about race and real estate right here. I think this is a good place to leave it. And we may have a feature every once in a while, but I think this is a good place to leave the conversations. Again, you can go to raceandrealestate.com and watch all the previous episodes. And this is our 12th episode today, so I think we might leave it here. This is Aaron Rice, eXp Realty, signing out.